Welcome, my friends. It's one day to the exam, and we're here just talking about stuff that you need to know. And I'm going to be whizzing through various slides, just showing you my thoughts. So here's the mindset. One day to the exam, you got to be cool. You got to be confident. You got to be collected. Someone said, Phil, I'm not able to get into cool and confident. Look, do it. Just do it. Stop going to the dark side. The dark side is I want to feel frazzled and I want to feel like I don't know what's going. No, don't do that. Feel confident. Take it from me. You've done a lot of stuff building up to today. So why won't you being cool, confident, and collected? You have to channel your Clark Kent, right? Your Superman, right? Channel the Superman side, right? Channel the big kahuna side, not the little wimp. Don't be a little wimp going in. You've got to boss up on the exam. Then you got to be aware and action ready. What I mean by that is crazy stuff happens on the exam. I've heard from two students that they got a question that didn't have enough boxes for the options given. Crazy stuff like that. Or you might go into the exam and there's a technical hitch. What are you going to do? Get into the mind space of being ready for action. Anything could happen. I had a student whose exam was halted for 1.5 hours because the entire system at the exam center tanked. But she got back on after everything came up 1.5 hours later and aced the exam. But you got to be ready for craziness. It happens. So I'm just saying, be ready for anything that comes. But you also need to be aware and ready to bounce back. For example, on my exam, I was very aware and in the zone when I was encountering difficult question after difficult question. The way I was action ready is I changed my strategy. I said, I'm going to look for my gimmies. I'm not just going to take a question 1 to 60, for example. I'm going to go to 58, 59, 40, 45. I'm going to control my outcome on the exam. And that's what I did. In my case, back in the day, you could go all the way to the end, question 200. Now you're limited to 60 by 60, but whatever you need to do to be in control of the exam, do it, okay? Next one is lead yourself. Less is more. I'll just say, shut it down. Like this is the night before, right? For some of you, shut it down. Don't go crazy until midnight hours studying. No, instead, relax your mind, relax your brain, free up bandwidth so that you can process the information well in the morning. And then be mindful of your resources. What is your biggest resource on the exam? It's time, right? So going in, you're going to have 230. It's going to show 230 when you're at question 0. When you're at question 60, you want it to be around 170. Frank, what are the numbers since you just done this? What are the numbers? What are the numbers?
I didn't do that. What I do know is that when I finished the first one, the first 60, I had 140 minutes left.
Okay, there you go. Yes, that's the number.
So I
So
don't know. I know I had 140 minutes left. So
yeah.
out of that 140 minutes, so if
So I normally subtract what 75 from each one. So what is 230 minus 75? Is it 155? And then minus another 75 is what will that give us? Who can do the math?
so
230
minus what?
It's 80.
230 minus 75 is 180.
That's 155.
No,
230 minus 75.
it's 155.
155.
Okay, 155. And then 155 minus 75, is that 80?
80. That's correct.
And yeah, so you should have 5 minutes. Yeah, you should have 5 minutes left on the clock. So the idea is when the exam starts, you got 230. At the end of 60, you have 155. At the end of 120, you have 80. So just keep that in your mind, because what has happened to some people is they go in and they're not aware of the time, and before they know it, they got 10 minutes left. I had a student that had 10 minutes left and she had 40 questions. But what she did, I'm going to show you tonight what she did to be able to answer 40 questions. It sounds crazy. 40 questions in 10 minutes. So she used this. I call it the mindset mantra. So let me just give you these pieces of advice. Frank has touched on some of them. The customer is your primary goal. You got to move the project forward. You got to be fair. You got to be a steward, protecting the resources. You got to focus on the stakeholder and team well-being. You got to trust the team. You got to be a servant leader to serve and divert any obstacles coming towards the team. Also facilitate conflict. You got to be a mentor, not just to the team, but the entire firm. You got to act with integrity. Do not abuse your position. You got to be honest. You got to be a leader, courageous to lead. Remember, leadership is all about influence. Authority is not the same as leadership. So you got to be courageous to lead, to influence, and you got to be agile. You got to be agile and you got to adapt to be resilient. The next one is the process piece. So for process, I think Frank touched on some of this stuff. So the life cycle is very important. You got to tailor the life cycle. Frank said that the predictive thing is not bad. A lot of people think predictive is bad. No, it's not. Predictive is actually good. So in some cases, it's better to be predictive than agile in delivery. With that said, the PMI does favor agile thinking. So you could be agile in your thinking, but when it comes to the delivery, because of what we know from this thing over here called the Stacy model, you folks already know from training that this zone over here, the simple zone, is not bad. If you're close to agreement on the requirements and close to certainty on the technicality, then it makes sense to do predictive. But as you move towards complex, this is where agile begins to shine more and more. And up here, definitely you want to think agile. So that's the general thought, that predictive is not bad. Another thing I'll say on the exam is, because you're taking the project management professional, you're going to have that talk of you are the project manager. Very rarely will you get you're the scrum master and things of that nature. All right, so hybridize.
I didn't see any scrum master, but mostly project manager.
Wow, there you go. Thank you, Frank. So hybridize where necessary. Have an agile mindset to deliver incrementally. I think Frank touched on this as well, where you can deliver incrementally. Do that where iterations make sense to get feedback on prototypes. Do that. Be systemic and strategic. Think about change as well, not just change in documents, but also organizational change. And you got to do it with intentionality. Inspect and adapt. Be a problem solver. Think about the triple constraint. There are times when you're going to have to make trade-offs. Definitely don't sacrifice quality, though, right? So proactively building quality. Quality is big. Risk and governance is big. So proactively manage risk. The whole A team versus easy, Frank. Well, what do you have to say about that? The easy and A team, easy for positive risks and A team for negative. Is this a big thing that we need to pay extra attention to, or is it just one of those, well, maybe one or two kind of things?
Well, I didn't see any question on this.
Wow, that's good to know. All right. So
but the first time I did.
Okay, okay. So Corvin, just put that in your back pocket. A lot of stuff that we expect may or may not show up.
And I was looking forward to it, but I didn't.
Okay. Manage all areas. You got to logically plan. So the knowledge, hey, Corvin, this is very important because I know tonight you were thinking of doing the 49 processes. I just want to let you know, based on what I've been hearing from a lot of folks, they will not give you verbatim process names. Frank, what do you have to say about that? Verbatim process names and verbatim language from PMBOK.
No, I didn't encounter that. What you would just see is more of scenarios that you would know what they're talking about, provided you know the processes. But in terms of use of the exact lexicon, I didn't see any of those.
Thank you, Frank. Good stuff. All right. In closing, buy-in. You got to seek buy-in where necessary. You got to seek authorization where necessary. There are going to be some questions.
So you will see closing, the word closing. You will see initiating. But
okay.
all those executing, monitoring, they will not.
Yeah.
but
Well,
there will be scenarios around the processes under them.
gotcha. So don't get carried away with cramming at all. Just focus on the understanding the language, and be ready to seek buy-in and authorization, because you're not the sponsor. You're not the product owner. There are going to be some things that you are not able to do as a PM, and you got to know, like when a project's objectives are changed, you don't have the judgment call to shut down the project. For example, when other departments are required to weigh in on a change, you don't have the power to command, for example, operations people to roll into the project and do whatever you say. So you need to remember that. Frank, any advice on that piece?
I'll say it again.
Like, when you've got the PM trying to close the project without anyone else involved, maybe your project can no longer meet its objective.
Okay, so if the project cannot meet the objective, like it has to be officially communicated from the stakeholder or the sponsor who authorized the project in the first instance.
Exactly.
The same way in Agile, if a sprint has to be cancelled, it is the product owner that has the authority to cancel it.
I love it.
So, and such a conversation, the product owner would have also had behind the scene with the sponsors.
Exactly.
But the product owner will have to come out to say that this is being cancelled. The project manager cannot cancel. No member of the team, the developers cannot. It's only the product owner that would have the authority, because they are acting on fiduciary basis again, or delegated authority from the sponsors.
I love it, Frank. Thank you. Very good analogy as well. So to keep note of all those things. Good deal. All right, for business, you got to think about the environment. If the environment is changing, you got to respond. You got to focus on outcomes. Outcomes are more important than output. So what is the end game of everything? Keep that in mind whenever you're answering the questions. It's not about just the deliverable. It's about the general outcome. Organization change is important, and you are a change agent. The way the project impacts the firm is important. The way the organization's culture impacts the project is also important. The concept of benefits, it's a word PMI like very much. You got to understand page 7, tangible and intangible benefits in PMBOK 6. You got to understand the benefits management plan, the concept of a benefits owner. Frank, any comments on benefits?
Yeah, I think there was a question I encountered on benefits, which they did say that
we'll let that remain ambiguous in the interest of PMI's clause.
Yeah, it was around project with multiple benefits.
Gotcha.
Yeah, which has to do with the benefits. The people that will benefit would be different departments. So there was a way the thing was put together, but
we'll keep it high level, as high level as possible. But what would the nugget be to take? What would the takeaway be? Like page 7, I'm thinking
the takeaway will be to have meeting with the functional leaders who will be eventually designated as benefit owners.
Oh, great. I love that. Good deal. Yeah, that's a good one. So especially for our friend taking the test tomorrow, definitely take a look at the whole benefit owner as much as you can, to just understand that this is someone who is not just mentioned. This person is actually doing stuff that the project manager cannot do, because the idea is for the benefits to be realized in many instances outside of the project, after the project. So this person is doing the legwork on the metrics of the benefits, making sure that those benefits are realized, communicating the value gain progress. So you got to be aware of that individual. Okay. All right. The concept of value swap, dynamic scope, is talked about in the Agile Practice Guide around page 77 or 78 in the Agile Practice Guide. Value swapping is big in the world of Agile. Value delivery, strategically planning the value delivery system. This is PMI's lingo from the 7th edition. The concept of compliance, Understanding that compliance is something that the PM should be thinking about. And I've got my mom's clock going crazy in the background. You're hearing a cuckoo clock. Please excuse the sound. But compliance is something you need to think about the risks. You need to think about the strategy for compliance. Sustainable community, COPs, communities of practice, PMOs, VDOs, value delivery offices, also important. Lean thinking, the general thought is to eliminate waste at all levels. And then lastly, gating, toll gates, stage gates, kill points, phase end reviews, to deliver only value. That is something to be aware of as well. Now, going to the next piece, again, you got to remember that you're not going to get a lot of Scrum lingo per se, but it's going to be implied. So a lot of times the Scrum Master, you don't hear that term like Frank said. But Frank, let's talk about, and of course, we're making this as high level and agnostic as possible because we want to respect PMI's decisions. But in terms of product backlog, I know PMI favors calling it a backlog in the Agile practice guide, but what about this word sprint? Is that something we should expect to not see?
You would see, however, I did know that I saw a couple of questions that had to do with sprint. But guess what? The word wasn't sprint, it was iteration, which is
iteration. There we go. Exactly what I wanted to communicate. Yep. So you could get the word iteration. Thank you, Frank. And then as far as these knowledge areas, you heard what Frank said about initiating and closing. Those are two you can expect. Executing, monitoring, and controlling, planning. You're going to have a lot of scenario stuff that may not explicitly call those out as stages. And then the knowledge areas, again, at this point, you don't need to cram. What you do need to understand is the implication that one could have on another. Let me give you an example. So someone says, as a result of additional requirements, which happens here, there has been a schedule increase. Then it says, what should you do? Well, you know where it's coming from. It's coming from requirements. So if someone's talking about communications as, oh, get communication straight, you know it's not that. And someone is saying, oh, add more resources to the project, and that will stop the schedule from going off track. Well, you got to weigh all the parameters. You know that it's as a result of this. So you got to choose the question carefully, the answer carefully when it comes. But you also could remember this, that if you're adding more resources, then you're crashing. So sometimes crashing could be an answer, but they may not explicitly say it's crashing. They may use a word such as adding resources, or they may say paying to expedite a part to be delivered on the critical path, and things such as that. You got to be on your guard, because a lot of times it boils down to an A and a B, and the B might be correct because it is directly linked to, in this case, let's say crashing, right? So they may say add in resources, just like I said. But I wouldn't be looking out for a ton of explicit knowledge area speak, and I wouldn't be discouraged if I didn't see it. Now, it boils down to something like this, and I've gone over some of these with Frank in a previous video. So this, according to what I've heard from people, this is not unusual. You could get some, depending on your exam, you could get over maybe 30%. Some people say maybe not as many that are long like that. Let's go back. Something like this, some people say, yeah, maybe I get about 20% of the questions. So you got to understand, when someone said 20% of my questions were this long, you got to remember that this means about 35 questions could be this long. So if you find these long questions, you got to have that fortitude to keep going. Don't get discouraged thinking, oh my goodness, what's my exam turn into? No, just keep going. And then I want to piggyback on something that Frank shared a few days ago. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter for the sake of this illustration. Let me give you one more question type. It is not uncommon, I'm just shortening the question arbitrarily. you could get a question that looks this short, right, Frank? Something this short is not impossible.
Yeah, it could.
And it depends, you know, we don't want to give a prescriptive number, so you're not surprised. But if you get a question that is short, according to what we've heard from our friend Frank, you could also expect in turn, I'm just going to go ahead and do some funky editing here. You can expect the options to be longer, right, Frank? If you get a short question, you can expect the options to be lengthier. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is just stuff to help prepare your mind, nothing groundbreaking as such, but really just giving you insights into what to expect. All right. With that said, just a few more little things here and there. All right. So I've talked about the calm mindset. Now, your exam is going to focus on a number of problems, right? But the problems or the challenges or the situations that you could face, we could bucketize them. Like you could have conflict situations that cut across the people aspects, like Frank was alluding to, resources, communication, stakeholder. And then you could have risk type things. You could have impediments, right? That cuts across all the areas. You could have issues or problems. You could have legal or regulatory concerns. You could have change. And the bottom line is it will fit into people, process, or business. It is going to test your predominantly mindset. It's going to test you on, will you move it forward or will you go after the red herring? Like, will you solve the customer's problem or will you go after coaching a team member? What is the most pressing? You got to ask yourself, what is the most pressing and what is going to move the project forward? And that's really how you need to be thinking. Frank, anything else that could serve as encouragement for our friend here that we could add to this discussion, looking at these buckets of challenges?
I think everything you've said here is very good to master and internalize. So you have excellent resources, I would say. And like I said, I never used any material that is outside what you have.
Awesome.
I didn't have time to energy to be reading. So I was like that is like Lennon Richard's song, Stuck on You. So I was stuck on you.
Hey, thank you, Frank. And it's always advised. And honestly, anyone who has the exam tomorrow, I'll just say you need to get in the mind space of moving things forward. That just needs to be your mantra. But anyway, I've taken up enough time of our friends who are going to go through the 49 processes as well. So I'm just going to say all the very best to anyone who has the exam coming up. And thank you to Frank for weighing in. I'm going to go ahead, stop the recording, and let our friends get on with their daily scrum.